All right, so today we are going to be taking a deep dive into Lenin's State and Revolution.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
It is?
It's a controversial one.
Very much so.
We have excerpts from the book itself,
Okay.
prefaces, postscripts. We're really going to try to get into all of it.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting because these questions of power and revolution and the ideal society, I mean, this is stuff that is still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating is that he was writing this in the lead up to the Russian Revolution.
Right.
So he's not just theorizing, in a vacuum.
Right.
This is a guy who's trying to put these ideas into practice.
Yeah.
In a very real way and in a very tumultuous historical moment.
Yeah. So to get into it.
Okay.
So he starts off with this pretty bold claim that the state, even in a democracy, isn't this neutral entity serving the common good.
Yeah.
He really sees it as a tool.
Yeah.
As a weapon wielded by the economically dominant class to keep themselves in power.
He uses some really striking language to describe this.
Yeah.
He talks about the state as this special force for suppressing one class by another.
Oh, wow.
And get this, he even argues that democratic republics, while maybe a step forward from monarchies, right?
Yeah.
Are still fundamentally tools of bourgeois control.
Okay, so wait a minute. Hold on. So I can already hear some folks pushing back on this. Like, isn't that a little extreme?
Yes.
I mean, don't democracies give everyone a voice?
Yeah.
Don't we vote?
Yeah.
We have representatives, checks and balances, like all that stuff. Is he saying that's all just a facade?
That's the heart of his argument, and it's definitely a provocative one.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying that even in a democracy, who really has the most influence on policy,
right,
who benefits the most from the way things are structured, it's often those with the most wealth and economic power, right?
So the system itself is tilted in their favor, even if there's some democratic elements,
right, sprinkled in.
Okay.
But the underlying structure is designed to maintain that inequality.
So this bourgeois state that he talks about, he really sees this as like the enemy.
The enemy that needs to be dismantled.
That needs to be completely dismantled.
I mean, if we want to achieve true liberation.
So then this brings us to his most famous and controversial solution.
Right.
Violent revolution.
No mincing words.
No mincing words there.
Yeah.
He argues that the only way to break the grip of this bourgeois state is to smash it.
To completely obliterate the existing power structure.
And he's not talking about
some
kind of peaceful protest or a change of government through elections.
No, he's talking about full-blown radical upheaval.
Right.
Like, there's a story that really highlights how serious he was about this.
Okay.
During the Paris Commune of 1871, this brief but intense workers' uprising, he wrote to a friend urging them to zerbrechen, the state machinery. Zerbrechen. It's German for shatter.
Wow.
And it really captures the forcefulness of his vision.
Yeah.
He wanted to see the whole thing broken into pieces.
Okay, so smash the state.
Right.
Got it.
But then what?
Yeah, what happens then? Anarchy, chaos.
Right.
What does he envision taking its place?
That's where the Paris Commune comes in.
Okay.
Not just as an example of revolutionary action, but as a sort of blueprint for the future.
Oh, interesting.
He saw it as a glimpse of what a truly revolutionary society could look like.
And what exactly did that look like to him?
Well, he was particularly fascinated by their attempts to create a more directly democratic system.
Okay.
They replaced the standing army with armed citizens.
Oh, wow.
Ensuring everyone had a stake in defending the revolution.
Okay.
They made sure that officials at all levels were elected.
Right.
And more importantly, instantly recallable by the people. And get this, public servants were paid no more than workers' wages.
Wow, that's a radical check on corruption and careerism.
Absolutely. It was all about dismantling those hierarchies of power and privilege that characterized the old system.
Right.
And they also focused on decentralizing power, giving more autonomy to local communes.
Okay.
While still maintaining national unity.
Yeah.
A tricky balance, for sure.
Yeah.
But they were trying to figure it out.
So they were experimenting with new ways of organizing society.
Absolutely.
Putting these
radical socialist ideas into practice.
Yeah, but the Paris Commune was short-lived.
Right. It was crushed by the French government.
So did he see that as a failure?
Not exactly. He saw it as a heroic but ultimately flawed attempt.
Okay.
A valuable lesson in both the possibilities and the pitfalls of revolution.
Yeah.
He believed they made some crucial mistakes.
Okay.
But their spirit, their audacity in trying to create a new world was deeply inspiring to him.
It's interesting how he uses this historical example to
Yeah.
try and figure out, okay, revolution is necessary, but what comes after?
Right.
How do you actually build
How you actually build.
a new society from the ground up?
And that's a question that's central to not just state and revolution,
Yeah.
but to revolutionary movements throughout history.
Yeah, it feels like he was really trying to synthesize theory and practice.
Absolutely.
Like he wasn't just an armchair revolutionary.
Right.
He was trying to actually lead a movement.
Yeah, and we can't forget, he was writing this in the lead-up to the Russian revolutions of 1905 and 1917.
Right.
I mean, those events are unfolding as he's putting these ideas to paper.
Yeah, it makes it even more tragic that he never finished that 7th chapter.
I know.
The one where he was going to analyze those very revolutions in light of his theories.
Oh, man. Talk about a cliffhanger.
Right.
Like, imagine the insights he might have offered.
Oh, yeah.
But even without that chapter,
Right.
it's clear those revolutions deeply influenced his thinking.
Yeah.
For example, the 1905 revolution saw the emergence of the Soviets,
Right?
those councils of workers, soldiers, and peasants.
Yeah.
Lenin saw them as a potential model for a new kind of proletarian democracy,
Interesting.
a way for the working class to organize itself directly without the traditional hierarchical structures of the state.
So it's like he saw those Soviets as a real-world embodiment of his idea that the state should
Yeah.
eventually be replaced by the proletariat organized as the ruling class.
Exactly.
It's not just about seizing the existing state,
Right.
but creating something entirely new.
That's a really sharp observation.
Yeah.
Lenin believed that the old state machinery couldn't be reformed or repurposed.
Okay.
It had to be completely destroyed and replaced with something that emerged organically from the working class itself.
That's a pretty radical notion.
It is.
But it makes me think about how we often talk about change happening through elections or reforms.
Yeah.
Is he saying that's all just tinkering around the edges? That real systemic change requires something much more drastic?
That's certainly the implication.
Yeah.
And it's a challenging idea for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Even those who are critical of the status quo.
Right.
It forces us to ask, how much power are those in control really willing to give up? And can meaningful change actually occur within the existing structures of power?
Yeah, and speaking of challenging ideas,
Yeah,
we have to address the elephant in the room,
right.
the dictatorship of the proletariat. I mean, it's a phrase that evokes images of authoritarian rule
Sure.
and frankly makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
How did Lenin envision this dictatorship?
It's crucial to understand this concept in its historical context.
Okay.
Remember, Lenin was writing at a time of intense class struggle,
Right.
when the ruling class used its power to suppress any challenge to its dominance.
Yeah.
For Lenin, the dictatorship of the proletariat wasn't about some tyrannical individual ruling with an iron fist.
Okay.
It was about the working class as a whole using its collective power
Right.
to dismantle the old order
Okay.
and prevent the former exploiters from regaining control.
So it's more about collective power than an individual dictatorship. It's a way for the working class to protect the revolution
Yes.
and build a new society.
And it's important to note that for Lenin, this was a temporary phase,
Okay.
not the end goal.
Right.
The ultimate aim was still to create a society where the state itself withers away,
Okay.
becoming unnecessary as people learn to manage their own affairs without coercion or hierarchy.
Okay, so let's talk about this withering away of the state.
Right.
It sounds incredibly idealistic, almost utopian.
It does.
How would a stateless society actually function? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you handle things like conflict resolution,
Right.
crime, or even just basic organization without some form of centralized authority?
It's definitely a concept that raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Lenin argued that in a communist society,
Okay.
social control would become unnecessary
Okay.
because the very conditions that create conflict and crime,
Right.
exploitation, inequality, and scarcity would be eliminated.
Okay.
He believed that people freed from the constraints of capitalist society
Mm-hmm.
would naturally cooperate and manage their affairs collectively.
But is that realistic?
Right.
I mean, human nature can be pretty messy.
Yeah.
Power vacuums tend to get filled,
Yeah.
even in the best of circumstances.
Sure.
Isn't there a risk that even if you successfully overthrow the existing state, new forms of power and inequality could emerge.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's a debate that continues to this day.
Yeah.
Among those who study and advocate for revolutionary change,
Right.
Lenin was very clear that the withering away of the state wouldn't happen overnight.
Okay.
He saw it as a gradual process,
Okay.
a process of education and transformation, where people would develop new habits and ways of relating to each other.
So even in this transitional phase,
Yeah.
there would still be a need for some form of structure and organization.
Absolutely.
Right.
Lenin recognized that remnants of the old system,
Okay.
what he called bourgeois, right,
Right.
would persist even after the revolution.
Yeah.
For example, he acknowledged that the distribution of goods
Okay.
wouldn't immediately be based on from each according to his ability to each according to his needs.
Right. That famous Marxist principle.
Right, exactly.
So how did he propose handling that transition? It seems like a recipe for chaos if you've got the old rules and the new rules clashing all the time.
This is where Lenin's thinking gets really nuanced.
Okay.
He argues that even though the bourgeoisie would be expropriated,
Right.
meaning they would lose their economic dominance,
Okay.
aspects of bourgeois law would continue to operate,
Interesting.
at least for a while.
Okay.
It's a bit paradoxical.
Yeah.
But he believed this was necessary to maintain order
Right.
and prevent the revolution from collapsing into anarchy.
So you've got this weird in-between state where the old rules are still sort of in place, but the power dynamics have fundamentally shifted.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be a very delicate and potentially volatile situation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of the challenges of any revolutionary project.
Yeah.
It's one thing to overthrow the existing power structure,
Right.
but it's another thing entirely to build something new and stable in its place.
And to do that, you have to be willing to confront some uncomfortable truths about power, even within your own movement.
Yes.
Which brings us back to Lenin's critiques of other socialists,
Right.
like Karl Kautsky,
Yeah.
who he saw as portraying the true revolutionary spirit of Marxism.
Lenin was ruthless in his criticisms of those he considered opportunists.
Yeah.
He saw Kautsky's brand of reformism as a dangerous deviation, especially in light of the revolutionary upheavals in Russia. He believed Kautsky was too willing to compromise with the bourgeoisie,
Okay.
to water down Marxist principles in order to achieve short-term gains.
And he saw that as a slippery slope.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Once you start compromising on your core principles,
Yeah.
it becomes harder and harder to draw the line.
Right. So for Lenin, the revolution wasn't just about achieving specific policy goals or reforming the existing system.
It was about a fundamental transformation of power relations.
Right.
A complete break with the capitalist order.
And he saw any attempt to work within that system
Yeah,
as ultimately doomed to failure.
exactly.
So it's not just about what you're fighting for,
Right.
but how you fight for it.
That's key.
The means have to be consistent with the ends.
That's a key takeaway from Lenin's thought.
Yeah.
He believed that the revolutionary struggle itself shapes the consciousness of the working class,
Interesting.
prepares them for the task of building a new society. And he argued that compromising with the existing power structure only served to reinforce its legitimacy
Okay.
and undermine the revolutionary potential of the masses.
So it's a very strategic, almost tactical way of thinking about revolution.
It is.
It's not just about ideals and goals.
No, it's about power.
It's about understanding power dynamics,
Absolutely.
exploiting weaknesses, maintaining a relentless focus on the ultimate objective.
And that's one of the reasons why Lenin's ideas, even if you disagree with them,
Yeah.
remain so compelling.
Right.
He forces us to grapple with the complexities of power,
Yeah.
the limitations of reform,
Right.
and the question of what it truly means to create a just and equitable society.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot to digest.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you don't agree with all of Lenin's ideas,
Right.
he raises some pretty fundamental questions
He
that
does.
we're still wrestling with today.
Absolutely.
Can you really create lasting change within a system
Yeah.
that's designed to protect the interests of the powerful?
Yeah.
Or does real transformation require a more radical approach? A complete break with the status quo?
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lenin challenges us to think beyond incrementalism,
Right.
beyond tinkering around the edges.
Yeah.
He pushes us to confront the limits of reform
Mm,
and to consider what a truly transformative revolution might look like,
right.
even if that vision seems daunting or even impossible.
And it all comes back to that central idea, the
Yeah.
state as an instrument of class domination.
Right.
If you accept that premise,
Yeah.
that the system itself is rigged, then it makes you question whether any meaningful change can occur without a fundamental shift in power.
Exactly. And that brings us to what I find to be one of the most intriguing and enduring aspects of Lenin's thought.
Okay.
This idea of the withering away of the state.
Right.
This vision of a future where the state as an instrument of coercion becomes obsolete because people have learned to manage their own affairs
Okay.
without the need for top-down control.
Okay, I have to admit, that part always throws me for a loop.
Sure.
It sounds incredibly idealistic, almost utopian.
It does.
I mean, people can be pretty messy and selfish, right?
Yeah.
Power vacuums tend to get filled even in the best of circumstances.
Right.
How can you possibly create a society where the state just fades away without things descending into chaos?
It's a bold vision, no doubt.
Yeah.
And one that sparks endless debate and speculation.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that Lenin wasn't naive about human nature.
Okay.
He understood that the transition to a stateless society would be a long and complex process, one that would require profound changes, not just in social structures,
Okay.
but also in human consciousness.
So it's not just about tearing down the old system,
Right.
but building something new.
Exactly.
Something that fosters cooperation and collective responsibility.
Precisely. And this is where the idea of the withering away gets really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Lenin believed that the process of revolutionary struggle itself, the act of working together to overthrow the existing power structure, would play a crucial role in transforming people's attitudes and behaviors.
So it would change how people think.
He saw it as a kind of social education,
Okay.
a process that would cultivate the very qualities needed
Right.
for a stateless society to function.
So it's not just about waiting for the state to magically disappear.
No.
It's about actively creating the conditions
Exact.
that make the state obsolete.
It's about developing new forms of social organization, new ways of resolving conflict,
Yeah.
new ways of distributing resources,
Okay.
all based on principles of cooperation, solidarity, and mutual respect.
That's a pretty tall order.
It is.
I mean, even on a small scale, trying to get people to cooperate and share resources can be a challenge.
Absolutely.
How could you possibly scale that up to an entire society?
It's certainly not easy, and there are no guarantees of success. But I think Lenin's point is that the alternative, simply clinging to the existing system, is ultimately untenable.
Okay.
If the state is inherently an instrument of class domination, as he argues,
Right.
then it will always be used to protect the interests of the powerful at the expense of the majority.
So it's a choice between trying to reform a system that's fundamentally flawed
Yeah.
or taking a leap of faith and trying to build something entirely new, even if it seems impossible.
That's the dilemma that Lenin presents us with.
Yeah.
And it's a dilemma that resonates far beyond the specific historical context in which he was writing.
Right.
It's a dilemma that every movement for social change, every attempt to create a more just and equitable society
Yeah.
has to grapple with.
And that's why, even though State and Revolution was written over a century ago,
Right.
it still feels so relevant today.
Absolutely.
It forces us to confront these fundamental questions about power freedom and the kind of world we want to live in.
It's a book that doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions,
Right.
but it challenges us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to imagine a future that might seem radical, even utopian,
Right.
but ultimately speaks to our deepest desires
Yeah.
for a world free from exploitation and oppression.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this deep dive has given us plenty to ponder.
A lot to think about.
We've explored Lenin's core arguments about the nature of the state,
Right.
his analysis of the Paris Commune, his critique of reformism,
Yeah.
and his vision of a stateless communist future.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is a lot.
But it's important to remember that these are complex and contested ideas.
Yeah.
There's no single definitive interpretation of state and revolution.
Right.
And Lenin's legacy remains a subject of intense debate and discussion to this day.
Which is all the more reason to engage with these ideas, wrestle with them, to challenge them.
To see what insights we can glean from them,
Yeah.
even if we ultimately disagree with Lenin's conclusions.
So, dear listeners, I leave you with this is Lenin, right?
Can we truly create a world without the state?
Yeah.
A world where power is truly in the hands of the people?
Right.
Or is that just a naive utopia?
Yeah.
A dream that will always remain out of reach?
It's a question worth pondering,
It is.
debating, and maybe even fighting for.
Until next time, Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.